How do you react when your own son books you into a care facility like you're a piece of old furniture to put in storage? How do you stay calm when you overhear him and his wife talk about selling your house and your car as if you've already disappeared? This is how I let them think I was weak while I prepared something they never saw coming. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Henry Clark, and I am 72 years old. I am a retired electrician. I live alone in the same small house my wife and I bought when Dan was still in grade school. The floors creak, the kitchen tiles are cracked, and the porch light sticks sometimes, but it is my home. I know every sound this place makes. I know which step on the stairs complains the loudest, and which window lets in the breeze from the south. People see my age before they see me. They see white hair, slow steps, a bit of a stoop. They do not see the years of climbing ladders, fixing panels, and carrying tool bags. They do not see the thousands of jobs I did without a single serious accident. They do not see how many times I have pulled other people out of trouble by knowing exactly which wire did what. That morning started like many mornings. I woke up before the alarm. Habit. Old men do not sleep in. I made my coffee, 2 slices of toast, a bit of jam. I sat at the small kitchen table my wife and I bought secondhand. Sunlight came through the lace curtain and made little bright dots on the table. I listened to the fridge hum and the quiet street outside. My knees hurt when I stood up, but they always hurt. I used one hand on the counter for balance. No big drama, just the normal fight with gravity. I rinsed my mug, wiped the crumbs, and thought about going down to the basement to check a breaker that had been sticky last week. The doorbell rang before I could move. It rang in that urgent way, pressed twice in a row. My son, Dan, had a habit of doing that. He never knocked. He pressed the bell hard, like he did everything, like he wanted to push time itself forward. I opened the door and saw Dan on the step with grocery bags in his arms. Behind him, his wife, Megan, held another bag and looked at her phone. She gave me a quick smile that did not reach her eyes. Dan walked past me into the hall without waiting to be invited, the way he always did now. Dan told me they had brought some things for me. He said they knew I probably did not eat enough. He said that older people sometimes forget meals. Megan nodded and said she had bought low-sodium soup and some easy microwave dishes, so I would not hurt myself trying to cook. I stood there holding the door, feeling the cold air on my back. I had made my own breakfast that morning, like I had made my own meals for years. But I did not say that. I just shut the door and followed them into my own kitchen. Megan started to move things without asking. She took some of my cans off the shelf to make room for her new ones. She said my food was not ideal at my age. Dan told me I should be grateful they cared so much. He said many people their age just left their parents alone and waited for the call from the hospital. His voice was light, almost joking, but the words hit me hard. They put the groceries away like this was their house. Megan opened the fridge and frowned at the way I stacked things. She told me I should not keep leftovers so long. Dan laughed and told her I'd always been stubborn about food and that I liked to stretch everything to the last penny. Then Dan told me their real plan. He said they had made an appointment with Dr. Evans, my doctor. He said it was for that morning. He said he had already called the clinic. He said I needed a full checkup because I had been forgetting things. I looked at the clock. It was not even 10 yet. I had not agreed to any appointment. Dan told me I always complained I never saw the doctor enough. So he had taken initiative. That was the phrase he used. He said it was better to be proactive. I told him I felt fine. I told him I had driven just last week and had no trouble. Megan shook her head and told me feeling fine is not the same as being safe. She said stairs were dangerous for people my age. She said the bathroom was slippery. She said she had read articles about it. Dan told me to get my jacket because they were already running late. He said the doctor was doing them a favor by fitting me in. I went along. I took my jacket from the hook and my old cap from the shelf. They walked ahead of me down the path like they were my minders. On the drive to the clinic, Megan talked the most. She sat in the front passenger seat, turned halfway toward Dan, who was driving. She spoke in a low, firm voice, the voice she used with clients when she wanted to sound like an expert. She told him about waiting lists. She told him about nice care facilities she had read about. She said good places fill up fast. She hinted that decisions had to be made early. She did not say directly that they wanted me out of my house. She did not need to. The direction of her words was clear enough. I sat in the back and watched the city pass by. I saw the old hardware store I used to visit every week when I was working. Now I went maybe once a month. I watched couples on the sidewalk hurry into coffee shops. I listened to Dan and Megan plan my life as if I was not there. At the clinic, the waiting room smelled of disinfectant and cheap tea. The chairs were lined up in rows. A TV on the wall showed a morning show with people laughing too loudly. We checked in, and the nurse at the desk greeted me by name. She smiled and said it had been a while. She asked how I was. Before I could answer, Megan spoke. She told the nurse that I had been more forgetful. She told her that sometimes I repeated stories. She used words like decline and episodes. The nurse's smile faded a bit. She wrote notes on a clipboard. She asked me to take a seat. I sat between Dan and Megan. They kept their phones out. They whispered to each other about schedules and meetings. I looked at the poster on the wall about heart health and tried to keep my breathing steady. In the exam room, Dr. Evans greeted me with a tired but kind face. She said she was glad to see me. She asked how I had been, and again, before I could answer, Megan took over. Megan told her she was worried about me. She said I sometimes left the stove on. She said I had gotten lost while driving. She said my house was not safe for a man my age. She painted a picture of a confused and clumsy old man. Some of what she said had a tiny grain of truth twisted out of shape. I had left the kettle once. The whistle had brought me back from the garden. I had missed an exit on the highway on the way to Dan's house once because traffic was heavy and the sign came up fast. None of those moments felt like the collapse Megan described. I tried to speak. I told Dr. Evans that I mostly felt fine. I told her I paid my bills on time. I told her I did my own shopping and cooking. Dan interrupted and told her I was proud and would never admit struggle. Megan nodded and said I was from another generation that did not like to ask for help. Dr. Evans listened. I watched her eyes. She looked at me when I spoke, then at Dan and Megan. I could see she was trying to balance what she heard. She asked me some simple questions. She asked what day it was, where we were, who the president was. I answered them all without trouble. She did some basic tests, checked my blood pressure, listened to my heart. She told me, in a careful tone, that it would be wise to think about support in the future, but she did not say I needed to be moved yet. She said she understood Dan and Megan's concern. She said it was good they cared. I sat there in the thin paper gown and felt like a child at a parent-teacher meeting. When the exam was done, we left with a few pamphlets in Dan's hand. I did not take them. I watched him fold them neatly like they were part of a plan. On the way out, Dan told me that they were going to have a little dinner for me at their place. He said Megan had already prepared things. He said everyone was looking forward to talking about next steps. I did not want to go, but I did not say no. Often, older people learn that saying no leads to long lectures. Sometimes it is easier to go along and watch. Their house was in a newer part of town. The houses all looked similar, with big windows and small yards. Inside, everything was bright and open. It felt like a showroom more than a home. The dining table was set when we arrived. Megan's parents were there. Lily was already seated, earphones around her neck, phone in her hand. She smiled when she saw me and got up to hug me. Her arms were thin, and she smelled like the apple shampoo my wife used to buy for her. We sat down, and Megan brought out food. Everything was arranged nicely on plates, the way she liked to post on her social media. There was a lot of talk. Most of it went over and around me. Dan told everyone that they had taken me to see Dr. Evans. He said the doctor agreed it was time to think about more support. He used that phrase, more support, as if it meant something gentle. Megan presented it like they were heroes making a hard choice. They spoke about safety, about liability, about statistics of falls in older people. At one point, Megan's father asked what would happen to my house if I moved out. Megan laughed and told him she was in real estate, and it would be handled. Dan told him I had a lot of equity. He said it did not make sense for such a big asset to sit there underused. He said the money could cover my care and also help with family goals. He did not look at me when he said that. He looked at his plate. Someone asked if Megan would be the one to list the house. She said, of course. She said it would be smart to keep everything in the family. She smiled in that hard way again. I felt the blood rush in my ears. I sat there, hands on my lap, and looked at the tablecloth. No one asked me what I wanted. No one asked if I was ready to leave my house, my tools, my memories. They talked about me like I was a problem to be solved and a resource to be tapped at the same time. I noticed Lily had stopped eating. She watched her parents, then looked at me. Her eyes were wide and uncertain. As the plates emptied and the conversation went on, the air felt heavy. At one point, Dan's voice got louder as he spoke about responsibility. He said it was not fair that they had to worry every day if I was okay. He said they had their own lives and their own child. He said they were stepping up where many children would not. Then, in the middle of all that self-praise, Lily's voice cut through the room. She asked in a small but clear tone if they were really going to send her grandfather away to live with strangers, and she asked what would happen to his house when they did. The room went quiet so fast I could hear the clock on the wall. Everyone looked at her, then at me. I sat there, feeling every pair of eyes on my skin, and waited to hear what my own son would say. After Lily spoke, the silence at the table felt like a wall between all of us. Dan cleared his throat. He told her that she did not understand how complicated adult problems were. He said that he and Megan were doing what was best for everyone. Megan added that they were just trying to keep me safe. They both sounded calm, but there was a sharp edge under their words. They did not answer Lily's question about my house. Not really. Dan said something vague about using it in a smart way. Megan said something about it being a family asset. Then they changed the subject to Lily's school, as if that could wipe away what she had just asked. I watched Lily press her lips together. She played with her fork but did not eat much after that. She did not look at her parents for a long time. When she glanced at me again, there was something new in her eyes. It looked like doubt. Later that night, when I was back in my own house, I sat in my armchair and stared at the dark TV screen. The room was quiet. The clock on the mantel ticked. The lamp gave off its soft yellow light. But inside my head, everything felt loud. I thought about how we had arrived at this point, where my son could sit at a table and plan my life without even asking me what I wanted. It had not always been this way. When Dan was a boy, it was just him, my wife, and me in a small rented apartment. I worked long days then, doing electrical jobs for a local contractor. I would come home with dust on my clothes and the smell of metal on my hands. My wife would have something hot on the stove, and Dan would run to show me a drawing or a toy car he had taken apart. Back then, he used to say he wanted to be just like me. He liked my tool belt. He liked the way I could fix things. When a lamp flickered or a fuse blew, he would stand beside me and watch as if I was performing a magic trick. We saved every extra dollar to get out of the apartment and buy a house. My wife was the one who saw the listing. She told me that the little blue house with the big maple tree in front felt right. The porch needed work, the roof needed patching, but the bones were good. We spent weekends fixing it up ourselves. I remember replacing old wiring in the attic with Dan handing me tools and my wife calling up the ladder to ask if we needed lemonade. We told Dan that this house was our anchor. We said that no matter what happened in the world, there would always be a place that was ours. He nodded like he understood. Years went by. We paid down the mortgage. Dan grew taller and quieter. He went off to college. I still remember loading up the car and driving him to his dorm. He hugged me in front of the brick building and told me in a serious voice that he would make us proud. He did well. He got a job in logistics. He met Megan at some networking event. When he brought her home for the first time, my wife and I tried our best to welcome her. Megan was direct and confident. She talked about her work in real estate. She talked about how tired she was of seeing older people sitting on houses that were, in her words, financial gold mines they did not use. I remember the way she said that. At the time, it was just conversation. I did not feel the sting yet. But the words stayed somewhere at the back of my mind. When my wife got sick, things changed quickly. One month she was walking around the yard, reminding me to trim the hedges. The next month she was sitting in a hospital bed with machines beeping around her. Through all of that, Dan was present in his own way. He visited. He drove my wife to appointments when I had to work. Megan came sometimes too, always with a coffee in her hand and tired eyes from long days at the office. After my wife passed, the house felt too big. Every room held a memory. For a while, I walked around like a ghost, not quite sure where to put my hands. Dan worried about me then, but it was a different kind of worry. It felt like concern, not control. He called often. He came over to fix small things I could have fixed myself, just to have an excuse to check on me. It was during that time that I met with a lawyer for the first time about serious paperwork. I was in my 60s. I still felt strong, but I knew nothing is guaranteed. Dan suggested that I should get my affairs in order, and I agreed. It seemed practical. The lawyer, a man with gray hair and gentle eyes, explained living trusts and wills. He talked about avoiding probate, about making things easier for family members when the time came. My wife had wanted security for Dan, and I did too, so I signed documents that put the house into a trust with certain rules. The details were clear then, but over the years they slipped into the background as life went on. I put the papers in a metal box, locked it, and put the box on the top shelf of the hallway closet. I told myself that I had done the responsible thing. After that, years passed without much drama. I retired. I fixed small things for neighbors. I tended the garden. Dan and Megan had Lily. For a while, we were simply a family with their small frictions like anyone else. Megan had strong opinions about everything, but as long as my wife was alive, she had someone to push back. After my wife was gone, that balance shifted. I noticed little changes first. Megan started suggesting that my furniture looked outdated whenever she visited. She would say that the couch was bad for my back and that the rug was a tripping hazard. She would move chairs around without asking. Once, I came home from a walk and found that she had cleared a whole shelf of framed family photos and replaced them with a single big modern print she liked. My wife's smiling face was now in a box on the floor. When I gently asked about it, she told me she was helping me declutter. She said I needed to think about the future. Dan, for his part, seemed tired. His work was demanding. He often looked at his phone even during family dinners. When Megan spoke about safety and risk, he usually nodded. Sometimes he told me he did not want anything bad to happen to me. Sometimes he said that if I fell and broke a hip, it would destroy them emotionally and financially. He made his worry about me sound like a burden he carried. There were times when I forgot small things. Once I lost my keys for a few hours before finding them in the coat pocket I had used the day before. Once I missed an appointment because I wrote down the wrong day. These things frustrated me, but they did not scare me. I adjusted. I started using a small notebook. I set phone reminders. I knew my limits and worked around them. But to Dan and Megan, each slip became proof of a bigger story. They started using words like decline more often. They would tell me I was not as sharp as I used to be and then laugh like it was a joke. When Megan helped me set up online banking, she insisted on writing down my password just in case. She took the piece of paper with her when she left, saying she would keep it safe. When Lily was younger, she loved coming to my house. We would bake simple cookies, and she would draw pictures of the tree in the front yard. As she became a teenager, she still visited, but her parents often framed it as a responsibility for her. They would tell her she should check on me while they ran errands. They turned my company into a duty. Still, I could tell she enjoyed the quiet here. She would talk about school and friends, and sometimes she would complain that her house felt like a showroom. She said that it always had to be ready for surprise guests because of Megan's work. As the months went by, Megan's comments about my house grew more direct. She would walk through the rooms and say that the layout would be perfect for a young family. She would say that with a few renovations and a coat of paint, it could sell for a good price. She would say that it was too much for one old man. I would smile politely and say that I liked it the way it was. She would respond that maybe we should think about what is sensible, not just about what I liked. The first time she brought up care homes, it was casual. She mentioned a client whose mother had moved into a facility and how relieved the family was. She said the place had nice gardens and activities. She said that sometimes professionals could take better care of older people than family because they were trained. Dan agreed. He said they both had busy jobs and a teenager and that life was a lot. At that point, I did not feel attacked. I thought they were just talking. But over time, the mentions became more frequent. They would send me articles about aging safely. They would point out news stories about seniors who fell while living alone. Every story was another little drop of fear and guilt. I pushed back once or twice. I said that I valued my independence. I said I managed fine, that I knew my house. Dan would respond that I was being stubborn. Megan would say that she understood I did not want change, but that sometimes change was necessary. So when they showed up with groceries and a pre-booked doctor's appointment, it was not a bolt from a clear sky. It was the next step in a pattern. Still, seeing the shape of their plan fully, seeing them talk about my house as money on a plate, felt like a slap. After that dinner at their place, with Lily's question still echoing in my mind, I went to bed late. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it was shallow. I woke up before dawn with a dry mouth and a heavy chest. I got up, made coffee, and walked slowly down the hallway. The house was quiet. The early light was gray and soft. I stopped in front of the closet near the front door. For years, that closet had held coats, umbrellas, and one metal box up on the top shelf. That box had not been opened since I met with the lawyer after my wife died. Sometimes I dusted it, but I never thought much about its contents. I had trusted that the decisions inside would work themselves out far in the future, when I was gone. Now I understood that the future other people were planning for me might arrive faster than I had expected. I reached up with both hands. My shoulders ached a little as I stretched, but I managed to get a grip on the cold metal. I pulled the box down and set it on the hallway table. My heart beat faster. Not from the lifting, but from what it meant. For a long moment I just stood there, looking at it. The key hung on a nail inside the closet, where it always had. My fingers brushed it. I did not open the box yet. I rested my hand on the lid, feeling the weight of all the papers inside, and I thought about Lily's question at the dinner table. What would happen to my house? The clock in the living room ticked, and the house seemed to wait with me. The box stayed on the table for most of that day. I walked past it again and again. Sometimes I put my hand on the lid. Sometimes I just looked at it and then kept walking. The house felt different with that box down from the closet. It was like a memory I had pulled out of storage and not yet faced. Around noon, Dan called. He told me he was coming by after lunch. He said he had a surprise for me. His voice sounded cheerful. It put a knot in my stomach. When he arrived, he did not even notice the metal box at first. He came in with his usual fast steps, talking as he walked. He told me that he and Megan had arranged something nice. He said they had set up a little visit to a place he called a community. He said the place had gardens and activities and good food. He told me it was just a tour, nothing to worry about. I asked him if this was a care home. He admitted that it was, but he insisted it was one of the good ones. He said that I should at least look. He reminded me of what Megan had said about safety. He said that they would feel better if they knew I had support. He was already half turned toward the door when he said this, already expecting me to follow. I looked once at the box, and then at him. For that moment, I left the box closed. On the drive, Megan called and put herself on the car speaker. She said she was sorry she could not be there for the tour, but she had to meet a client. She said she had already spoken to the staff at the place, and they were ready for us. She told Dan not to let me talk myself out of it. She said I was stubborn and would say I was fine even if I was not. I sat in the back seat and listened to them talk about me like I was a problem that needed a sales pitch. The facility, Sunrise Oaks, sat on a hill at the edge of town. The sign out front tried to look friendly, with green letters and a picture of a tree. The building itself was low and clean, with big windows and neat bushes lining the path. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of cleaning products and something sweet, maybe air freshener. There were soft chairs and a fake fireplace. A woman behind the desk greeted us with a trained smile. She looked first at Dan, then at me. Dan stepped forward and introduced himself as my son. He said that we had an appointment. He gave my full name and even my date of birth without looking at any paper. He had done his homework. The woman checked something on her computer and nodded. She said that Ms. Patel would be with us shortly. While we waited, I looked around. There were older people sitting in armchairs, some watching TV, some looking at nothing in particular. A man with a walker moved slowly down the hallway, staring at the floor. A nurse walked beside him and spoke in a gentle voice, but he did not seem to hear. It did not look like a bad place. It looked clean and calm, but it did not look like home. A woman in a dark blue blazer came toward us. She had a badge that said Amita Patel, Intake Coordinator. She shook Dan's hand and then mine. Her handshake was firm. Her eyes were sharp. We sat in a small office off the lobby. The walls had framed photos of smiling older people in gardens and at group activities. On the desk were stacks of forms and a computer screen. Ms. Patel asked me how I was doing. I started to answer, but Megan had already given her a story on the phone, and Dan seemed eager to reinforce it. He jumped in and said that I had been having trouble with memory. He said that I sometimes left things on the stove. He said that my house had stairs and that it worried them. I told Ms. Patel that I managed fine. I told her I used a notebook and reminders. I said that I cooked and cleaned and paid my own bills. I kept my voice steady. She listened. She asked me simple questions about my daily routine. I answered them. When she asked if I had ever gotten lost while driving, I told her about the one missed exit, nothing more. Dan leaned forward. He told her that I was being modest, that I was more confused than I let on. He said he was afraid something serious would happen. His words made me sound fragile, like glass. Megan was not there in person, but her influence filled the room. Ms. Patel had a file in front of her with notes from their previous calls. I could see my name on the tab. I could see other lines under it, but not the words. Ms. Patel slid some papers across the desk. She said that for a move-in, there were forms they would need. She said it was good to prepare even if we were only thinking about the future. She held out a pen. Dan reached for it, but she did not pass it to him. She placed it closer to me. She said, in a careful tone, that any decision to move in had to be made by me, as long as I was able to make my own decisions. She looked me in the eye when she said that. There was a question in her gaze. I picked up the pen and read the top page. It was a general information form for visitors. It did not commit me to anything. I filled out my name and address and signed it. I did not touch the thicker packet beneath it. Dan shifted in his chair when he saw that. We went on a tour. Ms. Patel showed us a room that she called cozy. It had a bed, a dresser, a small bathroom, and a window looking out over the parking lot. She said I could bring some personal items. She said it would feel like my own space. Dan told me that it seemed nice. He pointed out the emergency call button near the bed. He said I would be safer here. I nodded, but did not say yes. As we walked back toward the lobby, Ms. Patel dropped back for a moment and walked beside me while Dan moved slightly ahead. She asked quietly if I felt pressured. Her voice was polite, but I could tell she was watching. I told her that my son and his wife were worried. I said they were pushing fast. I told her I was not sure what I wanted yet. She nodded and said that was important to note. She said that no one should feel rushed into a move. I did not know at that moment that her notes and questions would matter later. I just knew that it felt good to have one person in that building who spoke to me as if my opinion counted. On the way out, Dan stopped at the front desk and confirmed something with the receptionist. I heard him mention a trial stay. He said he would call with dates. He seemed excited, almost relieved. When we got back to my house, he dropped me at the curb and said he would talk with Megan and the facility and get things set up. He said I should not worry about the details, that he would handle it. Then he was gone. I went inside and closed the door behind me. The house felt both safe and fragile, like a shell that could be cracked if someone hit it hard enough. The metal box still sat on the table where I had left it. Before I could turn to it, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Megan. She wrote that they were taking me to a family restaurant that weekend for Lily's birthday. She added a smiling face at the end, as if everything was normal. I put the phone down and looked at the box again. I still did not open it. Not yet. At the restaurant, 2 days later, the air was thick with the smell of fried food and sugar. The place was busy, with families and groups talking over loud music. Neon signs glowed above the bar. Screens on the walls played sports. We had a long table near the back. Balloons in Lily's favorite colors were tied to the chairs. She seemed happy at first. She had friends there, along with Megan's parents and Dan's coworkers. It was supposed to be her night. I tried to focus on her. I watched her laugh with a friend about a video on her phone. For a moment, I could almost forget the pressure around me. But the adults at the other end of the table were not focused on Lily. They were focused on plans. I heard Megan telling one of her colleagues about a new listing she expected to have. She called it a free and clear single-family home in a good school district. She spoke about potential buyers and open house strategies. She did not say my address out loud, but she did not need to. The details were enough. Later, when I went to the restroom, I had to pass by the small side area near the entrance where people waited for tables. As I walked by, I heard Megan's voice again, lower now, on the phone. She told someone that the house was practically theirs already. She said that once she got me settled in the facility, things would move fast. She mentioned my car too, saying that it would help them offset some of their debts. She laughed softly when she said that. I stood just out of sight, listening. My hands felt cold. It was one thing to hear them talk in general about the future. It was another thing to hear my house and car discussed as if they were chips on a table. On the way back to the table, I paused by the bar to steady myself. The TV above me showed a game, but I did not see it. I saw my wife's hands planting those first flowers in our yard. I saw Dan as a boy running up the porch steps. I heard Megan's voice in my head, turning all of that into numbers. Back at the table, Lily looked at me and frowned. She asked if I felt okay. I told her that I was just a bit tired. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on me a little longer than before. After the cake and songs and photos, everyone drifted toward the parking lot. Lily hugged me and told me she was glad I came. Dan promised to call about the trial stay at Sunrise Oaks. Megan said that things were finally moving in a good direction. Each word felt like a small shove. That night, when I got home, the house was quiet again. I took off my jacket and went straight to the table in the hallway. I took the key from the nail and slid it into the lock on the metal box. The click was soft but final. I lifted the lid. Inside were neatly stacked envelopes, a copy of my wife's death certificate, and several thick folders. The top folder held the trust documents. The next one had the deed to the house. There was also a separate, thinner document with a title that mentioned healthcare decisions. I sat down and began to read. The language was dense, full of phrases I had to go over twice, but the basic structure became clear. The trust placed the house in my name as trustee. It laid out what would happen after I died. It named Dan as a beneficiary. It mentioned certain conditions. It did not, however, give Dan the right to make decisions about the house while I was still alive and capable. The health document was different. It gave Dan limited authority to make medical choices for me only if I could not speak for myself. It did not mention money. It did not mention the house or the car. It did not say anything about him being allowed to sign on my behalf today. I sat there with the paper spread out on the table. For the first time in weeks, some of the fog in my head began to lift. Dan and Megan had been talking and acting as if they already had control, as if my house was already theirs to sell, as if my future was theirs to arrange. But on paper, in the documents that mattered, that was not true. They needed my agreement. Without it, they were pushing against a locked door. I did not know every law, I did not know every step, but I knew enough to see that I was not as powerless as they believed. As I traced the lines on the page with my finger, my phone started to buzz on the table beside the box. The sound made me jump. The screen showed an unknown number from a local area code. When I picked up, a calm voice introduced herself as calling from Sunrise Oaks. She said they were just calling to confirm my move-in date for the trial stay that Dan had arranged. I listened to her give me the date and time that had already been set, and I understood very clearly that in my son's mind, I was almost already gone. The woman from Sunrise Oaks spoke in a polite, practiced voice. She gave me the date and time as if we had already agreed. She said they were excited to welcome me. She asked if I had any questions. I did not argue with her on the phone. I told her I understood. I told her I would be ready. My voice sounded calm, even to my own ears. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I put the phone down and looked again at the papers on the table. The trust, the deed, the limited health document, my name, my wife's name, Dan's name, all printed in black ink. My mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. My heart still hurt, but under the hurt, something else was forming. It was not rage, it was something quieter and heavier. It was a decision. I took a blank sheet of paper from the desk drawer and wrote down 3 words: house, money, health. Under each word, I wrote what I knew. Under house, I wrote, mine while alive, trust after. Under money, I wrote, no permission given to Dan. Under health, I wrote, Dan helps only if I cannot speak. Seeing it in my own handwriting helped. It made the gap between what the papers said and how Dan and Megan were acting feel very real. The next day, I went outside to take the trash to the curb. My neighbor, Tom, was in his driveway, fiddling with something in the back of his car. He was around my age, with a cap always on his head and a slow, steady way of moving. We had known each other for more than 20 years. We had helped each other fix fences and move old appliances. We were not the kind of friends who talked about feelings often, but we knew each other's habits. He waved and asked how I was. I started to say the usual fine, but the word caught in my throat. Instead, I told him I was a bit tired. He studied my face and said I looked like I had not slept well. He asked if everything was all right. I told him, in simple words, that Dan and Megan were talking about moving me to a care facility. I said they were also talking a lot about the house. I did not go into legal details. I just watched his reaction. His eyes narrowed a little. He said he had seen Megan around my property a few days ago. He said she had been taking photos of the front and sides of the house with her phone and what looked like a small camera. He assumed she had my permission. When I did not answer right away, he frowned. Then he mentioned a flyer he had spotted by accident. He said he had seen it on the passenger seat of Megan's car when she came by his place to drop off something for his wife. The flyer had my street name on it, along with some basic details about a coming soon listing. He asked if I was planning to sell. I told him I was not. Not yet. Maybe not ever, unless I chose it. The knot in my stomach got tighter. Tom looked at me for a long moment, and then asked if I wanted to grab a coffee at the small cafe down the street. I agreed. At the cafe, the air smelled like beans and old wood. We sat at a small table by the window. People came and went, talking, tapping on laptops, living their own quiet dramas. It made mine feel less like a nightmare and more like something I could actually handle. I told Tom a bit more. I said that Dan had arranged a trial stay for me without asking. I said that Sunrise Oaks had already called to confirm. I told him about the dinner and how Megan talked about the house as a family asset. Tom shook his head. He said that children sometimes think they know best, but that this sounded like more than just worry. He asked if I had talked to a lawyer. I admitted that I had not spoken to one in years since setting up the trust after my wife died. He told me that if he were in my place, he would not wait. He reminded me that in his own family, one of his cousins had tried to take advantage of an elderly aunt. A lawyer had been the one to stop it. He said there were people whose whole job was to deal with this exact kind of situation. His words did not feel like pressure. They felt like a suggestion from someone standing beside me, not above me. On the way home, I stopped at a payphone near the grocery store. Old habit. I did not want to make this call from my own line where Dan might see the record if he ever looked. I dialed the number printed on the old card from my previous lawyer, the one I had saved for years in my wallet. A recorded message said he had retired. It gave a new number for a different attorney who had taken over his practice. I wrote it down, and later, back at home, used my own phone to call that number. A woman with a calm voice answered and introduced the office. I asked if they handled trusts and questions about elder decisions. She said yes. I told her I was a former client of the previous lawyer and that I had some concerns about my son making plans without my full consent. She listened and then offered me an appointment with attorney Carla Ruiz. She said Ms. Ruiz was experienced with estate work and issues around elder rights. The next available slot was in a few days. I took it. In the time before that meeting, I focused on gathering small pieces of proof, even if I did not call it evidence yet in my own mind. It simply felt like collecting everything that showed the difference between what I could do and what Dan and Megan were saying about me. I took my notebook and started writing down dates and events. The doctor's visit, the dinner, the tour at Sunrise Oaks, the confirmation call. I wrote who said what and roughly how. I did not trust my memory to hold all the details for long without help, so I gave it help. Then I went to the bank. The bank branch I had used for years had changed its interior a few times. The carpet was new, the counters modern, but I still recognized the layout. The same older man, Mr. Pierce, who had helped me set up my accounts after my wife died, was still there. He wore a suit and a polite expression. When I asked to see him, he invited me into his glass-walled office. We sat down, and he asked how he could help. I told him I wanted to make sure that no one had made changes to my accounts without me. I said that my son was helping me with some things, but that I wanted to confirm who had access. He typed my information into his computer. His eyes scanned the screen. After a moment, his eyebrows rose just slightly. He told me that there had been some recent online requests connected to my profile. One was a request to change the mailing address on my account to Dan's home address. Another was a request to add a helper user, listed as Daniel Clark, to view and manage certain parts of my account. He said the system had flagged the requests because my profile had a note that changes needed extra verification. It was a safety measure we had put in years ago, at my own request, after a fraud scare with someone else I knew. Because of that note, the bank had not processed the changes yet. They had sent a letter to my current address asking for confirmation. I had not seen that letter. Maybe it was still on its way, maybe it had been moved by someone helping sort my mail. I did not say that part out loud. I told Mr. Pierce that I had not asked for any changes. He nodded and said he would print a note confirming that I denied the requests. He also said they would add a stronger block on my profile. No changes of address, no added users, no new cards, unless I was there in person with identification. He slid the printed note across the desk. I put it into my folder with the trust and deed copies. Before I left, he asked if everything was all right at home. His voice was gentle but direct. I told him that for now, I was just making sure all the doors that needed to stay locked were truly locked. He nodded. I could tell he understood more than I had said. The next day, I took a bus downtown to the county building. I walked through a metal detector, emptied my pockets, and followed the signs to the records office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air was dry. At the records desk, a clerk asked what I was looking for. I told her my name and my address and said I wanted to confirm that nothing had changed with my property. She typed, clicked, and then looked at me over her glasses. She said the deed still showed the trust as the owner, with me as trustee. That was as it should be, but she also mentioned a note in the system. There had been an inquiry logged by someone with Dan's name about guardianship and possible future transfer processes. It was not a formal filing, she said, just a consultation, but it was there, guardianship. That word felt heavy. It meant more than just help. It meant legal control. I asked her if there was more information. She said no, not without a formal case. She printed the basic property record for me. I thanked her and left. On the way out of the building, I sat for a while in the lobby. People moved past me with files, with briefcases, with worried faces. I felt strangely calm. Each piece of information, bank, property, the health proxy, was like a part of a circuit. The pattern was becoming clear. Dan and Megan were not just talking. They were slowly trying to build a cage around me, using systems that were supposed to protect people like me. But they had started before securing the right keys. That mistake mattered. When the day of my appointment with Attorney Ruiz came, I dressed in a clean shirt and my least worn pair of shoes. I put all my papers into a large brown folder. Copies of the trust and deed, the health document, the banknote, the property printout, my handwritten timeline. Her office was in a modest 2-story building attached to a small plaza. Inside, it smelled of coffee and toner. The waiting area had simple chairs and a plant in the corner. A receptionist led me into a private meeting room. After a few minutes, a woman in her 50s came in. She wore a dark blazer and had calm, direct eyes. She introduced herself as Carla Ruiz and shook my hand. She asked what brought me in. I told her, as simply as I could, what had been happening. I did not dramatize. I did not cry. I just laid out the facts: the doctor visit, the care facility tour, the dinner, the house talk, the phone call, the bank requests, the guardianship inquiry. She listened without interrupting. Sometimes she wrote notes. Sometimes she asked small, clarifying questions. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she told me, in clear language, that as long as I was mentally competent, and from what she had just seen and heard, she believed I was, my son had no right to move me, sell my house, or touch my accounts without my consent. She said the limited health proxy did not give him control over my finances or property. She said the trust could be updated if I wished. She did not tell me what to feel. She told me what the law said. She suggested several actions. Some of them were simple, like putting in writing that I did not consent to any guardianship moves. Some were more serious, like updating the trust and will to reflect the current situation, especially if I felt my son no longer acted in my best interest. I asked her if all this would cause a fight. She said it might, but that it was better to decide for myself now than to let others decide for me later. She reminded me that I had already done the hard work years ago by setting up documents. Now it was just a matter of adjusting them to match reality. I agreed to move forward. She prepared a list of documents for me to sign over the next visits. She also asked if I would be willing to discuss things in front of Dan and Megan at some point, with her present. At first, the idea made my stomach twist. The thought of a confrontation in an office made me feel small. But then I remembered how it had felt to sit at their dining table like a piece of furniture while they talked about my life. I told her that if there had to be a conversation, I wanted it to happen on neutral ground, in a place where the rules were clear, not in a kitchen with plates clinking. She nodded. She said she would arrange a family meeting in her larger boardroom with clear goals, to explain the legal situation, to set boundaries, and to make sure everyone understood what they could and could not do. We ended the meeting with a few signatures on basic authorization forms so she could act on my behalf. I left the office lighter, even though I knew hard days were coming. That evening, back in my house, I placed my growing folder of papers in the metal box again, but this time I did not put the box back up on the closet shelf. I kept it on the desk in my small home office within easy reach. As I sat there, my phone buzzed on the table. The screen showed Carla's office number. When I answered, her assistant told me that the family meeting had been scheduled for the following week. She said that Dan and Megan had already confirmed they would attend. She asked if I was ready for that. I looked at the open box, at the neat stack of papers inside, and listened to the quiet hum of my old refrigerator in the next room. I said that I was. The week before the meeting moved in slow steps and fast jumps at the same time. Some moments dragged, like early mornings when I stared at my coffee and listened to the clock. Other moments rushed, like the phone calls and short visits from Dan and Megan as they pushed their plans forward. Attorney Ruiz called once to confirm that paperwork was ready for me to sign. Her assistant spoke clearly and calmly. She said the documents were based on the information I had given and the decisions I had made. She did not go into details over the phone. She just reminded me of the date and time. On the day of that appointment, I woke up before dawn. I showered, shaved carefully, and put on a shirt that still held a faint smell of the fabric softener my wife used to buy. I pressed my pants with the old iron. It felt like getting ready for a job interview, even though I was long retired. I took my folder and walked out to the street. Tom was in his driveway again, checking something under the hood of his car. He waved and asked if I needed a ride. I told him I was going to see the lawyer. His face grew serious. He said he could drive me. I accepted. On the way, he said he was glad I was getting things in writing. He did not ask for details. He just tapped the steering wheel and hummed a bit under his breath, like he always did on long drives. At the office, I met with Ruiz in a smaller room than the one she had mentioned for the family meeting. This room held a round table instead of a long one. There was a stack of papers in front of her, neatly arranged with colored tabs. She went through them with me one by one, describing them in simple language. Some updated the trust, some dealt with my will, others adjusted who could make decisions for me and under what conditions. She never rushed me, she never spoke down to me. She paused often and asked if I had questions. I listened carefully. I asked for a few sentences to be explained twice. When I understood, I signed where she pointed, my hand steady on the pen. Each signature felt like a small door being locked into place. When we were done, she slid a sealed envelope toward me. She said that this was a summary letter in plain language of what we had done, in case I wanted to read it later at home. She also said that copies of the documents would be stored in her system and available if needed. She told me again about the family meeting. She said she had reached out to Dan and Megan and described it as a chance to clarify responsibilities and expectations. She said they had agreed to attend. She had also invited a representative from Sunrise Oaks at my request. Ms. Patel had agreed to come. Hearing that name gave me a small sense of balance. I knew Megan had been speaking to Ms. Patel only from her side. It felt right to have us all in the same room with one set of facts. I left the office with the sealed envelope in my folder. Tom was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his car. He asked how it went. I told him things were moving the right way. He nodded and said that was good enough for him. Back at home, things did not slow down. If anything, they sped up. Dan and Megan came by that afternoon with flattened cardboard boxes in their arms. They said they wanted to help me get ready for my stay at Sunrise Oaks. Megan opened closets and started moving things without asking. She pulled down winter coats, old blankets, and photo albums. I watched her hands hovering over the albums. I stepped forward then, lightly, and took the stack from her, saying I would decide what to do with those. She hesitated, then shrugged and turned back to the clothes. I could feel her annoyance in the way she folded things a bit too sharply. Dan walked through the rooms and pointed out items he said I would not need anymore in a care facility. He mentioned the old TV, the armchair, the tools in the garage. He said I should think about donating them or letting him handle them. I told him we could talk about those later. I kept my voice soft. I agreed to pack a small suitcase with clothes and personal items for the trial stay. I chose simple things: comfortable pants, shirts, my slippers, my shaving kit, a small photo of my wife and me from years ago. In the kitchen, Megan talked loudly on her phone to someone from her office. She used phrases like, "Timing is perfect," and "we're almost ready to list." She walked to the window and looked out at the yard, describing it as a good selling point. She talked about how buyers like trees. When she hung up, she told me and Dan that she already had interest in the house. She said that as soon as I was settled, she could move fast. She smiled as she spoke, a bright, hard smile. I thanked them both for their help. I said, in a steady tone, that I was glad they cared enough to plan. At the same time, in my mind, I pictured the documents I had signed that morning, sitting safely in Ruiz's office. The day of the trial stay came sooner than I expected. Dan picked me up with my small suitcase. He seemed cheerful. He said this was a good step. He said I would see that the facility was not so bad. In the car, Megan sat in the front, tapping messages on her phone. She told Dan to remember to confirm something with Ms. Patel about billing. She said she wanted to make sure everything was lined up with the house sale plan. She spoke as if the house was already sold and I was already gone. When we walked into Sunrise Oaks, the lobby looked the same as before: soft chairs, fake fireplace, faint sweet smell. Ms. Patel came out to greet us. She shook my hand and then Dan's. Megan stepped forward and started asking questions about room availability and timelines before Ms. Patel even finished her sentence. We sat at a small table near the front desk. Ms. Patel turned to me first and asked how I felt about trying a night there. I told her I was willing to see what it was like. I said I understood it was only a trial. Dan interrupted to say that if all went well, we could move quickly. Ms. Patel noted that comment. I watched her eyes. They were calm but sharp. She asked Dan some questions about who would be responsible for financial matters. He said that I could not handle all that anymore, and that he and Megan would take care of any forms. He added that the house would be sold to pay for my care and that Megan was already working on it. Ms. Patel's face changed just slightly. She asked gently if I had agreed to sell my house. I said I had not decided anything like that yet. Megan said we were in the process of helping me see what was best. Ms. Patel did not argue. She just wrote something on her tablet. They showed me to the room I would be using for the night. It was the same one we had seen on the tour. The bed was made neatly. There was a small bedside table and a bathroom with rails. A TV hung on the wall. As Dan and Megan fussed over where to put my suitcase and how to arrange my things, Ms. Patel stood by the door, observing. Before she left, she quietly reminded me that I could ring the nurse if I needed anything. She also said that if I felt uncomfortable or pressured in any way, I could talk to her directly. When they finally left, the room was strange and quiet. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. I could hear muffled sounds through the walls. A TV somewhere, a voice calling out, a cart rolling down the hallway. There was nothing wrong with the place itself. The staff were polite. The room was clean, but it felt like a station, not a destination. It felt like a waiting room between one life and something else. That night, sleep came in short pieces. An aide woke me once to check my vitals. Someone down the hall called out in confusion. The light under the door stayed on, a thin line across the carpet. In the morning, Ms. Patel visited my room. She asked how my night had gone. I told her honestly that I appreciated the care, but that I missed my home. She nodded and said that was normal. She then said, in a careful tone, that she would be documenting not just my health status, but also the information she had heard from my family. She said that any move into their facility had to be free of pressure and done with clear consent. She added that she took that part very seriously. Her words settled over me like a soft blanket. I thanked her. Dan arrived later to take me home. On the drive back, he talked as if everything was decided. He said that now that I had experienced a night there, I could see it was fine. He said he was planning to confirm a full move-in date soon. He also mentioned that Megan had already spoken to a potential buyer about the house. He said the buyer was eager and that the price was good. He told me not to stress about the details because he and Megan would handle all the boring stuff. I sat in the back seat and watched the familiar streets go by. I listened to my son describe my life as a chess piece he could move. My emotions were complicated: sadness, disappointment, and a strange sense of calm sitting side by side. When we reached my house, I stepped out and felt the ground under my feet like a promise. Dan followed me inside, talking about deadlines and schedules. He said that the lawyer's office had called about a meeting, and he assumed it was just a formality to sign things related to guardianship and the house. I told him I would be there. I did not correct his assumptions. Later that day, Carla's office called me too. Her assistant reminded me about the date and time for the family meeting. She mentioned that Dan and Megan had confirmed. She also said that Ms. Patel and a representative from the bank might join by phone if needed. She asked again if I was comfortable with all of that. I told her yes. The night before the meeting, I walked slowly through each room of my house. I touched the backs of chairs, the edges of picture frames, the railing on the stairs. I opened the door to the garage and looked at my tools lined up on the pegboard. I stood in the yard under the maple tree and felt the rough bark under my palm. This might still be my home safely for years, I thought. Or if life took me away from it one day, it would be on my terms, not as a prize someone grabbed too early. In the morning, I dressed carefully again. I put my papers back in the folder and slipped it into a worn briefcase that had been my father's. Tom drove me to the office once more. On the way, he wished me luck, then corrected himself and said I did not need luck, just patience. At the law office, the receptionist led me past the small meeting room to a larger boardroom with glass walls. Through the glass, I could see a long table, several chairs, and a large printer in the corner humming quietly. Dan and Megan were already seated on one side of the table. Megan's broker, Glenn, sat beside them with a laptop open. Lily was there too, near the end, looking small in a big chair. Tom sat a little back from the table, near the wall, his hands folded. Ms. Patel stood near the far side, speaking quietly with Ruiz, who held a stack of documents. Everyone looked up as I reached the doorway. I stepped into the room. The door closed behind me with a soft click that seemed to echo louder than it should have. At that same moment, the big office printer in the corner started to whir and then spit out a thick stack of papers with my name printed across the top page in large, clear letters. Ruiz began by asking everyone why they thought they were there. Dan spoke first. He said this was to finalize his guardianship and align my assets for my care. Megan added that they needed to make sure the house and car were handled properly. Glenn said he was there to confirm details about the upcoming listing. Ms. Patel simply said she wanted clarity about my consent and circumstances. Ruiz nodded and laid the first document on the table. She explained that the only authority I had ever given Dan was a limited health proxy, to be used only if I could not speak for myself. She said he had never been granted financial power of attorney or any right to act on my property while I was competent. She added that I was competent and that this meeting itself proved it. She then slid out the bank's written note. She said the bank had received online requests to change my mailing address and add Dan as a helper, and that these had been denied after I personally confirmed I had not made them. She called this an attempted overreach. Next, she played a short recording from my kitchen, Dan and Megan discussing getting me into a place so they could finally use the house and car. Their own voices filled the room. Megan went pale. Dan tried to say it was a joke. Ruiz did not respond to that. She just looked at Ms. Patel. Ms. Patel stated calmly that any admission under this kind of pressure would be unethical. She said Sunrise Oaks would not take me as a resident and would file an internal elder abuse concern. Ruiz then laid out the new trust terms. She explained that I held the house and car for my own use as long as I lived. After my death, they would pass directly to Lily and a named charity, not to Dan or Megan. She pointed out a clause triggered by attempts to control or erase me. Glenn closed his laptop. He said he would not be involved with any listing. Lily moved her chair closer to me and took my hand. Dan began to talk loudly about betrayal and ingratitude. Megan tried to smooth her voice and asked Ruiz if there was room to revisit the documents. Ruiz said there was not unless I requested it, and that I had just confirmed I would not. She slid one final letter across the table. She explained that it was my written notice that I would no longer sign for their loans, debts, or purchases, and that any contact about my finances must go through her office. I stood up, feeling every year in my bones and none of the weakness they had imagined. I placed my house keys in front of Lily and told her, in a steady voice, that the home would wait for her one day, but for now, it was still mine. Then I turned, opened the boardroom door, and walked out into the quiet hallway, leaving my son and his plans sitting in stunned silence behind the glass.